Right.
But watching shag, basically, a little bit of watching shags do various things in various weather conditions.
That's
we
fun.
actually once, the birds would get everywhere in our house because it was on an island. So we actually had a shag on the toilet one day, just sat there in the middle of the room. I've heard all kinds of things. Owls in the house, flying in. The seals also live there on the island. So once we had a seal in our toilet as well.
Oh.
Just walked all the way into the house, and we had to kind of chase it out.
I can't think of any more human activity than conducting science experiments.
The game I play is a very interesting one. It's imagination in a tight straitjacket.
The beauty of a living thing is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together.
What I always think should be the basis of education is not answers, but questions. We should teach kids how to question.
So this week on the podcast, we had Jon Finch, who has a very appropriate name since he did part of his master's research researching birds. He's more into insects nowadays, though, and we talked to him about different pollinators and how they can have mutual relationships. Enjoy the episode.
You're going to kill it, dude. I watched your 3MT presentation.
3 minutes. Yeah.
That's good. We'll make the 30MT.
30MT, yeah.
That's it. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Again, tangents are good. We can talk about TV shows. I ended up talking about Stranger Things with Alexi. So
You can do that again.
yeah. Do you watch it?
I do watch Stranger Things, yeah.
Did you watch the new season?
I did. Well, only halfway through, so no spoilers, please.
What
But I
the-
did enjoy the polywog. I'm enjoying that sort of
Yeah.
horrible monster going off.
Oh yeah. So
It's exciting.
episode what, like 4, 5?
Episode 4, something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
It's getting intense,
Yeah.
and I can tell it's just going to get worse.
Yeah.
So
It's.
yeah, I'm excited
Sorry.
about
Do you know? Have you ever watched Westworld before?
that. Westworld?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, what type of like TV shows are you into?
Mixture. Documentaries, Stranger Things, crime, that kind of stuff. True crime,
True crime.
stuff like that, yeah.
How to Make a Murderer. Have you watched that?
I've watched that, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't actually own a TV.
You don't?
No. So being an international student and living in a PhD household, I don't think any of our housemates really that keen to shell out money for a TV. So none of us have bought a TV, and we don't have a TV in our house. So we end up listening to a lot of podcasts and reading and doing a lot of stuff on the internet. And that's one of the... we could easily buy a TV. We're just all a bit tight. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have a TV downstairs because I live with my family, but I never use it, man. I do everything on the internet.
Yeah. Well, that's in the digital age, I guess. It's
Exactly.
who we grew up to be.
There was a time where I was like 10, and I could tolerate the 5-minute ads between like I used to watch Dragon Ball Z. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah,
Dude,
follow that.
Oh,
Big
dude.
fan. So yeah, well, in the BBC, which is in England, is one of our main TV companies, there are no adverts because it's all publicly paid for. So that's what I'm kind of used to. So yeah, coming over here, and all the channels here are commercial networks, pretty much. And you do get adverts just all the time. And also, when you watch mainstream TV, you'll just end up watching something that you don't really care about because it's on. So I'm slightly addicted to River Monsters, the fishing show, for no particular reason.
Is that where they go hunting for those big fishes where they use their fist?
Oh, they use all kinds of things, but yeah, anything like that. Like it's a weird nature documentary with some fish on steroids kind of thing going off, and I'll watch that just because it's on. But no real interest in fishing or anything like that.
That's
So
interesting.
I actually try and avoid TV if I can, if it's
Yeah.
not something I actually want to watch.
That's interesting. Just
Like
be
quality
careful
thing. Oh,
of.
yeah.
Sorry, because as you can tell, we have $15 mic stands,
Yeah.
so it's just going to reverberate and then pick up on the mic.
And I'm
So-
articulating too much as well, which might happen through the presentation.
No, all good. I think if you don't have Netflix, no problem. You can always, as a student, I always justify like streaming shows allegedly.
Yeah,
Because I just can't afford it yet.
no comment from me. Not going to incriminate myself. Just yet.
I just said allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Yeah, I think one of the main things I watch is documentaries. That's the main thing. I really like those. Mainly lots of nature documentaries and stuff like that, and that kind of is always been one of my passions from a very young age, and kind of explains why I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Really?
Because I was talking to my mum the other day, and she was going through some of my notebooks and things from when I was about 6 years old, and it's just full of pictures of animals and various things like that, animals, bugs, plants that I've been drawing or writing about. And I didn't quite realise that I was that obsessed from an early age, but now I look back and I say, okay, I've always had an interest in the natural world, and that's probably what's ultimately led me down this path and why I'm sitting talking to you in Australia right now.
Right. So, where did that fascination come from?
I don't know. Obviously, David Attenborough is a big influence in lots of people's lives of all ages. I'm not sure why I always was interested in the natural world. Could well have started with The Lion King and gone on from there. The Lion King is a great ecological film. It's got a strong ecological message in it. The circle of life is all very important. It's and something we still think about now as adult scientists now is the idea of the circle of life and energy and nutrients, all kinds of things being recycled through various life forms. So maybe that's an influence. The Jungle Book. I mean, I'm maybe just listing films that I liked because they had animals in them, but maybe these, Disney did have an impact on my career path, and David Attenborough and all kinds of things like that.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I'm curious. Which one came first, your interest or your exposure to these different?
Who knows? I'm not sure. They're just all definitely there, but I can't tease apart either one.
Yeah.
It's not like I grew up on the Serengeti or anything like that. So,
Can you imagine? We're on the Serengeti.
Growing up in quite a rural, not rural, suburban part of the UK, with not a great deal of wildlife around.
Right.
Who knows why I focused on that particularly, but it could be anything, I imagine.
Have you watched the new Planet Earth documentaries?
I did watch some of them, yeah. Again, not having a TV, it makes it quite difficult. But I've watched all of Planet Earth 1,
Yeah.
Blue Planet, and that's coming out again now as well, which I'm super excited for that as well. But I did watch some of the Planet Earth, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. It's just so amazing, and all of that series of documentaries as well. So, Human Planet as well, which is one of the more sort of anthropological ones, is also amazing as well. Yeah, I just love all those things really. It's rarely, I don't think there's any of them I haven't watched.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. But whenever I do watch it, I'm like, man, like how much work actually went into creating something like this? How many hours a day just sit there still just to, watch this iguana run away from like these bunch of snakes on the snake island?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's amazing how, like a 5-minute sequence, that must have taken months. And then even before that, planning for people to, just really stupid things like visas, packing the right number of socks, to go on these expeditions and stuff like that. It all takes so much time.
Dude.
And when you do this stuff, like when you're now making a recording, there's a lot of work obviously that goes into you just doing that. But then if you have to catch whoever you're trying to record, and travel to some far off location or get permission from the local government, I'm sure it's just such a long and arduous task.
Yeah,
Very impressive.
Or what if the podcast could only occur? I mean, what if I had to like chase people and wait for the right conversation?
that would make it more difficult.
God, that'd be difficult. So, okay, these nature documentaries, potentially Simba from The Lion King was your inspiration to get into.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, how did that develop?
So I kind of was in the UK, and I was finishing my A-levels, which is the equivalent of your HSC, I think. And I was kind of trying to think of what I might do. And I kind of had lots of pretty broad interests in lots of different things. And actually kind of resented having to pick like one specialty, because there's lots of subjects I enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I was pretty good at English, and I was pretty good at biology and chemistry. Pretty bad at physics, so that just was decided for me. But I did enjoy learning about it. I just wasn't very good at the exams. So I kind of realised at one point that I'd always had this interest in wildlife and the natural world, and that I should probably do a degree in zoology, which is how I started. Most people think zoology is what you might do if you were training to be a zookeeper, but it's very academic, and it's purely about studying and developing an interest in the natural world, and particularly animals in that case. And so I went to University of Newcastle upon Tyne, which is a university in the far north of the UK, far north of England, and did 3 years there, studying various things, and during that time developing quite a strong insects interest. From Lion King to ants, really moving that way, and yeah, just kind of really enjoying the whole process, and finding that I was very passionate about these subjects, and even talking to people in my class, they kind of recognised that I was very passionate about learning and understanding, and thinking, oh, isn't this really cool that they do this and this does this, and that's so amazing.
Well, your fascination with insects interests me because I think I have a phobia of insects.
Okay.
Simply because
You're not alone yet.
there's so many to keep track of, and I just don't know which ones are dangerous. I avoid the ones with bright colors, but
Good idea,
yeah. But whenever I see an insect, I'm like, man, I don't know if you're my buddy or you just want to jack me, you know what I mean? Fear, I think a lot of times stems from ignorance and from the unknown.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
So there aren't many insects or other creepy crawlies that I'll kind of recoil from, or if I see them, they get me worried. Wasps, bees, stuff like that, I'm pretty good with them, because you kind of know that they're that knowledge you have about them, that understanding kind of tells you that they're not gonna hurt me.
Yeah.
But if I'm picking up a barbecue or something like that, I'm gonna be pretty careful about accidentally touching a redback or something like that.
Yeah. But if you see an insect you just don't have any idea about, are you like, oh?
I'm pretty excited if that happens. If I see something and I'm like, what is this? I have no idea. Usually I'm going around, and if I think something interesting, then I start picking it up and playing with it. And the bit of knowledge that I do have is enough to keep me sort of relatively safe. I did get bitten by a big green catadid the other day.
What's a
It's
catadid?
like a massive grasshopper, like a huge thing, and they feed on fruit trees around here. And it crashed into my windscreen at about 10 o'clock at night when I was driving home, so I pulled over really quickly and jumped out of the car and grabbed this thing. And even as I picked it up very carefully by putting my hands, pincering it with both my forefinger and thumb, I could see it was coming round to chomp me, and it gave me a good bite. So I think twice about doing that again.
Dude, I would have just hit the windscreen.
This is it. I mean, I was jumping out of the car looking for it. Even now, I've just realised that this morning on the way in, I saw a spider on a flower. I trapped it in a little pot that I happened to have in my bag. And I thought, I'll go look at this in the lab, and now I've just realised it's still sitting in my car. So I'm going to release this spider as well fairly soon.
That's hilarious. Well, that's how you tell who's a biochemist and who's...
That's true, yeah.
Like my gut reaction is like, get away, run. And yours like, ooh, what's this?
So stop playing with it. Yeah.
So your undergrad in zoology was at University of Newcastle, you mentioned?
Yep.
How did you decide, or when did you decide that you wanted to get into research? Because you said you developed this interest in insects. How did you decide to take the next step?
So towards the end of my degree, we did an honours project, and I actually decided to do an honours project on seabirds. So I did my honours project on a bird called a shag, which is like a large aquatic seabird that lives on the coast of the UK.
Right. Sorry, that word has other meanings.
It does have other meanings.
In your country.
It does, yeah. So I did. Yeah. I can't remember my best shag puns right now. But I'm sure there are absolutely loads. Anyway.
Oh, you just got me.
Yeah. So what happened was, from there, I went and worked on this island to do my project. And this is a tiny island. It's about 200 meters long, and it's about 4 kilometers off the coast of the UK in the North Sea. And I did my project, and I got to know people there while I was doing this research. And from that point, I spent then 2 years working on this island as a wildlife ranger, working with birds.
Oh wow!
So puffins, you might not know what those are. It's kind of like a small penguin from the northern hemisphere with a brightly coloured bill, sort of red and blue and white. So I spent 2 summers working on this seabird island with something, and we estimated something like 250,000 birds lived on this island.
Wow.
And it's a very small island, as well as seals and all kinds of things. So it's one of these amazing wildlife places, and some of the birds, very much like the magpies and the lapwings here, will come down and peck you on the head when you get next to their chick.
Right.
So our house was actually in the middle of their nest of these several thousand birds. So they were pecking us all the time, and I had a great time living on these islands and driving a boat to work, and it was amazing.
Wow.
And that was real conservation work, trying to monitor these populations which are globally threatened by overfishing. All the birds feed on fish, and by climate change, because the distribution of their fish is being changed by these warm waters, which we get a lot more of these days. So I was working as a conservationist for a while, and a lot of that was amazing, really fun work, and just living with people who shared my interests. But a lot of it is really hard, tough work, managing islands, cutting down vegetation, moving things, raking things. There were no running water on the islands, and no toilets, so we had to manually haul water to the top of the island for visitors to use in the public toilets. So it's pretty backbreaking work. And after 2 years, I was kind of thinking, I don't want to be doing this for the rest of my life. I need something else, and started kind of thinking about my academic interests again. You know, what would I want to do? And I didn't really want to be the person carrying things, you know, all my life. I wanted to be some higher up and actually making decisions and being engaged.
And getting other people to carry things.
Yeah. Exactly.
So tell me what you did for your honours, because we didn't cover what you researched.
So the project was, it wasn't a particularly good project actually. It was just kind of looking at the breeding biology of shags and how...
the reason why I just wanted to come back to your honours was to hear you say shags a few more times.
just like Austin Powers speaking. So it was just looking at their breeding biology, like how often did the male and female change over? Like, was there a difference between male and female breeding behaviour? Because there are kind of different interests going on between a male bird and a female bird.
So you're looking at the shagging behaviour?
The shagging behaviour of the shags. The breeding biology of shags is very interesting. Shags have a lot of... they're meant to be monogamous. A lot of seabirds are meant to be monogamous. They just sit with each other, and even through multiple years, they shouldn't really change mates that much. But a lot of people realise that even within a colony, there's a lot of what they call extra pair copulations going on. So infidelity within the seabird colony. So it's quite a scandalous place. Seabird colony with lots of naughty things going on. So my kind of project was looking at these, trying to see these naughty things, which is basically impossible unless you could bring genetics into it.
Right.
But watching shags shag, basically, a bit of watching shags do various things in various weather conditions.
That's
we actually once, I mean, the birds would get everywhere in our house because it was on an island. So we actually had a shag on the toilet one day, just sat there in the middle of the room. I've heard all kinds of things. Owls in the house, flying in. The seals also live there on the island. So once we had a seal in our toilet as well. Just walked all the way into the house, and we had to kind of chase it out.
Dude.
But it's like how big is it? 100-kilo female seal.
Holy shit.
Was trying to go into the house and have a pup in the house.
Oh.
That's what they try and do in the winter.
Oh.
And then,
That's interesting. Have you seen seal shag penguins?
not.
You
I'm
have-
sure. No. I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure they've had a go.
Oh, they've recorded it. It's
Seals shag penguins. What?
Yeah.
Oh no. I see what you mean.
yeah. I've seen chimpanzees do it to frogs.
It's a horrible world out there, the natural world.
Yeah, and people
They'll
have.
show you that in The Lion King.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was trying to get to, right? People have like this Disneyfied perspective of what happens in nature, but nature's pretty brutal.
Nature is brutal. In fact, one of my best memories from working that island is we'd have loads of visitors come on, and we had this huge colony of they're called guillemots. So like a small penguin again, and they just stand on the rocks and had their chick directly on the rocks in this colony of like 20,000 birds all standing there. So if you think like what an emperor penguin looks like huddling in the Antarctic, it kind of looks like that. And then periodically we would have groups of school kids come onto the island as well, and they would walk along and they would stand in front of this huge colony, and they would have this amazing view of life, the absolute epitome of nature, 20,000 animals all trying to breed at the same time. And we were standing there watching them, and just as we were watching, this huge gull, massive seagulls, call them, but gulls where we come from, just came down, and it just saw a chick right in the middle of the colony. It came down and it just swooped down, grabbed it in its bill, and then swallowed the thing whole live, right? And the teachers of the school, the class, they were berserk. They were like, "What's this? The kids can't see this. This is disgusting." What? The kids loved it. They were absolutely enthralled. They just watched something get absolutely munched, and I think hopefully they're all going to remember that experience for the rest of their life. Just seeing how brutal nature can be. This 2-week-old chick, just nearly ready to go and just being devoured by this huge monstrous bird.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Dude, that's crazy. Yeah, whenever I watch those nature documentaries, whenever like the predator eats the prey, like when my mom's around, she goes, she's like a little squirmish. I'm like, yeah, get him.
They always do it. I think they always go like, whichever animal you see first is probably going to survive these days, because I think they've gone away from showing too much gore. So if they introduce the lion first and make the lion seem really nice, then they'll let you see it kill the zebra.
Yeah.
If it's the zebra first, then
the zebra will
turns up, the zebra will
get away.
So it's all about that anthropomorphization.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is probably a bit off topic, but I still have like 20 minutes to pick your brain, so I'm going to ask the question anyway. The Disneyfication of nature, do you think that's had any sort of downstream consequences on how conservation happens?
That's interesting. One of the main conservation issues, as someone who studies insects, is that most conservation effort goes towards preserving big charismatic species like pandas or elephants or things like that. And there are definitely good sides to that. These very large animals use big areas of land, and by conserving those big areas of land for the large animals, you kind of conserve small areas or the areas of land for small things as well. They're kind of what we in the conservation industry they're called umbrella kind of species, I guess. So I think I'm not sure if people always enjoyed thinking and looking at these big animals, but I wonder whether it's put the emphasis too much on these what we call charismatic megafauna, these massive things that are really interesting. And as a biologist, when you kind of don't distinguish between the right of an ant species over the right of an elephant species, they're all kind of very important and have been evolving for billions of years. But I always think that publicity for animals and their particular plights is always good in any light. But yeah, I think it maybe has shifted things towards thinking about just the big species, orcas and lions and elephants and things like that, when we should really be having a more kind of holistic approach to how we think about wildlife.
Also, I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware of that dentist who went and shot that rhino in Africa.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't remember his name, but yeah.
And there were other cases where Cecil the lion, I think, was another one. But they have these parks in Africa where they maintain the populations of rhinos or lions, and they have to kind of control their populations. And I believe that rhino was an older rhino that wasn't able to reproduce and was attacking younger males, and so because of that charismatic megafauna, perhaps because of Disney movies, when it comes to lions and rhinos, people get super attached. And I suppose where I was coming from is like, even when it's good for the population for that rhino to die, because you raise money and that money is used for conservation, and killing that rhino means that other males have a chance to breed. Even though that's the case, we attach this emotion because of Disney movies or whatever the case, and that in itself can get in the way of trying to preserve these animals.
Yeah, I think so. It's a really interesting question. Like, is that morally right? Kind of sacrificing one animal for the good of all of them. And I think it can be quite a dangerous area when you think you can do that morally, to sacrifice one for the good of many. I'm not really sure where I stand on that issue yet, in terms of sort of big game hunting, and it's probably going to be quite specific to each individual case, and each individual animal, and how threatened it is and how it's being managed, and various things like that. But yeah, it's very interesting, and I think it's the way that a lot of conservation is moving towards that kind of that model of conservation. But as an animal lover, the idea of killing for sport or killing for enjoyment, I find kind of a little bit abhorrent, and I can't really understand it. Or people that sort of get a lot of enjoyment out of that. I can understand killing to eat, for sustaining yourself, but killing for sport isn't something that I can really condone in my line of work anymore.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as you. I think hunting is probably the most ethical way of acquiring meat, given like factory farming, the shit that we do to animals in order to harvest meat. I would much rather like get an animal that's lived a natural life, and then boom, it's taken out by a single shot. It doesn't have to get like, I'm sure you've seen like that documentary about how they raise cows, the feces levels like raise up to here. They have to give them antibiotics to. It's totally fucked, man.
Yeah.
But okay, so you did your 2 years, and then you were thinking about your academic career, or so what did you do next after the 2 years of spending time on that island? Looking at it was after the shagging.
Yeah.
Sorry, just trying to get that going.
So I guess I was kind of thinking like, it probably goes back to stuff that people had told me back when I was at an undergrad, that is that if you want to kind of progress in that field, conservation and wildlife and biology, then you really kind of need to have a PhD. I think you need to be a doctor, because in some instances I really think there's a glass ceiling unless you have one of those qualifications. So I began thinking about how I would get those jobs, and to get those jobs I probably needed a high level degree.
Yep.
So how was I going to go about getting one of those degrees? And the first step for me was to get a master's degree, sort of a higher up degree than I had, and then I would use that to get to go and find a PhD. So I decided in the end to do a degree in entomology, which is the study of insects, based on the fact that I was good at that subject at university, I enjoyed it, and insects in general are, if you're going to study the natural world, insects are just fascinating, and they really are so important. So there's a really famous ecologist called E.O. Wilson. He's kind of like this huge figure, and probably one of the most eminent ecologists and biologists we've had in the last 50, 100 years, and he said that insects are little things that rule the world, and he's right, because they're involved in so many important processes, and they're so numerous. So if you're going to think about what to study, if you're interested in the natural world, then insects are a very important part of that process. And other things like birds and mammals, if they disappeared, would the world look that different? Probably not. Yeah, that's the thing. It'd be sad if they did disappear, but the ecosystems themselves, the diversity, wouldn't change that much. So, okay, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
How many species of mammal do you think there are in the world? Species of mammal.
Oh man, I'm going to be put on Fuck, I don't know, man. Like 10,000.
Not too bad. Okay, so there's 4,000 species.
Oh fuck!
Okay.
I thought it was gonna be like a million.
And that number hasn't changed very much.
Okay.
Because it's rare to discover new species of mammal. How many species of bird do you think there are?
Probably like 500.
10,000
Oh,
species of birds.
shit.
So there's a lot of species of birds around.
Okay.
And how many species of insects do you think there are?
Oh man, probably a million or something.
The answer is we don't actually know this because there's so many that no one could possibly count or know how many species there are. We reckon that there's somewhere between 8 and 30 million species of insect.
Whoa.
But as of yet, we probably only have about 1 million of those which have a name, which is an amazing feat, just to have given a million different species their own two-part name, their own Latin name. So, in the context of that, let's meet in the middle and say there's something like 15 million insect species, and then you think about 4,000 mammals, and it's a rounding error. It's completely lost in this sea of diversity, which is insects. So they're the real kind of stars of this planet. We are very interesting, but insects are they're at the peak of evolutionary success and expansion and diversity, and they're really kind of amazing in that sense.
Yeah, I've heard the statistics, and you'd probably know better, but I've heard that if you wipe out all human beings, as you were saying, like Earth won't look much different. It'll probably be way better off,
We would be,
Yeah, but if you wipe out like all the ants, like we're screwed.
Yeah, the ants are so important for particularly kind of ecosystem functions. So they particularly in the tropics, they take all this biological matter and they turn it back into nutrients, which then goes back into trees and then back into living things. So they're very important in nutrient cycling, and they're also quite important predators in lots of places. So they decrease the number of lots of other species and allow plants and other animals to flourish. So they kind of help to maintain the balance. So these kind of keystone species.
Oh, right. Is that similar to how, like, when they introduced the wolves in Yellowstone,
Exactly, yeah.
they started killing off, like, reindeer, and that enabled the trees or the shrubs to grow, and that kind of changed the course of the river, and then it changed the whole landscape.
So the ecological term there is a keystone species, so something which has a dramatic effect on underpinning its environment and ecosystem. If you remove that, like wolves, then you'll get these kind of cascading effects where everything is affected in different ways.
Yeah.
So insects and ants particularly are super important in that respect.
Yeah.
But another, people talk about bees and other pollinators. Well, what would we do without bees? Well, we'd survive, but a lot of the really good things in life that we enjoy, the crops, so things like tomatoes, mangoes, avocados, without pollinators, we might have them, but we'd probably have to hand pollinate them ourselves, which would take a lot more time and be a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
So they're very important in our lives and to the ecosystem in general.
For sure, yeah. And before we move on to the next question, but I heard some crazy stat that if you add the biomass of all the ants on Earth, it roughly equals the biomass of all the humans on Earth.
I'd be surprised, if the biomass of ants wasn't greater. You're looking at countless millions of colonies, each containing, up to 2 million, 10 million individuals in some extreme cases. So the biomass is insane.
That's crazy.
And they're such important animals in tropical ecosystems, but also if you go somewhere like, if you take a walk outside and go into the Cumberland Plain woodlands just across the way here in Richmond, then you'll see hundreds of different ant species, loads of different ant species doing exciting things and managing that ecosystem in the best way.
Right. So you knew you had to do a PhD.
I did, yes. Well, I wanted to do a PhD.
Okay.
Wanted and needed to, because I kind of realised that the jobs I wanted, the jobs where I'd get to make fun decisions and do things and make a difference, required that kind of higher level of training almost. I kind of felt that was important for the best jobs, and the best salary, the best opportunities for me.
Right.
And it kind of played into my interests as well.
Right. So how did you get into one? What would it, like, because you're doing your PhD here in Australia.
I did, yeah, I am. So what happened was that I did my master's degree in entomology at a very small agricultural university in the UK, which kind of reminds me a lot of the Hawkesbury campus actually. It's a bit more remote. So And this particular campus, when you went there, you kind of opened the prospectus, and they had the two most important questions that students often ask in this for this campus were, can I bring my horse to university? I'm like, yeah, of course you can. We've got stables. And the next question was, can I bring my gun? And of course you can. Have a gun safe. So it's really like farmery, agricultural. Everyone drives Land Rovers and has tweed jackets and flat caps and big gum boots, as you call them here. So was at that university and did my master's degree. And at the end of it, I got this email from a researcher in Australia. Now, he was based here at HIE, and he knew my current supervisor, so that's how he got my email address, and he was kind of asking for students to come and undertake an international scholarship with Western Sydney University. So at the time, and I think they still do this, but Western Sydney were giving out scholarships to worthy candidates from across the world in an attempt to bring in people from different countries and different universities. And I think it was kind of an attempt to increase their international impact and their networks to universities across the world, which is very admirable, I think, and is universities are key in this kind of bridging the gap between countries and states. So Western Sydney University offered this position for everyone to apply for if you had a project. So me and my supervisor here now got together, and he suggested a couple of things I could do projects on. And in the end, we settled on this one particular project about very specialised pollination between certain plants in Australia and certain insects. And then we applied, and we sent that to Western Sydney University, and I was successful in getting that. So from that point on, it was the university said, "Can you be here in 3 months?" And the ball rolled on, and 3 months later, just after Christmas, I was starting my new life in Australia, new research role as well.
That's cool. So what type of questions did you try to answer for your PhD?
So,
or you're still trying to answer?
Still trying, yeah. So I have to explain a little bit about what it is, but I study what they call pollination mutualisms. And this means we study very specialized interactions. And
if you could just get up on the mic a little bit, so yeah.
Very specialized interactions. And in these interactions, every plant is pollinated only by a single species of insect. So what happens is the insect comes along and it moves pollen between the male and the female flowers of just that species, which is quite rare in nature to have a very specific pollinator that only does this. And this is important for the plant because it kind of having a specific pollinator means you have very efficient flow of pollen between your plants, and it's very good for outcrossing and making sure your offspring as a plant are the fittest possible. So in return for this highly specialized pollination service, this insect, which in my case is a moth, lays its eggs into the flower that it pollinated. So as this flower then develops into a fruit, some of its offspring munch through some of the seeds. So the plant actually is kind of sacrificing its offspring for this highly efficient pollination service, and this moth is doing the service because then it gets this really good food source for its offspring. So it's a mutualism there. This plant and insects have evolved to mutually benefit each other. So there are lots of different examples of this around the globe, and it's evolved sort of 4 or 5 different times, we think. This particular one that I work on evolved about 10 million years ago, just once, between one plant and one insect. And now there are 500 species of plants, and probably 500 to 1,000 species of insect doing the same role. So it's mutualism, it's how species interact for their benefit, it's how evolution takes something like that starting point, and then diversifies into hundreds of different species in many countries all the way across Japan and India down through Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and into Australia. And no one's really done much research on these interactions going on in Australia. So my project was to come in and very basic stuff from the start. So originally the title for my project for a lot of this has been low-hanging fruit, because it really is just going out there and seeing what's going on, because there's no kind of formal description of any of these behaviors. We don't know how many insects there are, how many plant species really, when they flower. So it's just going out and doing kind of really basic ecology, trying to answer these really basic questions about both species and how they interact. And once we have that knowledge, then you can start addressing other questions like, well, how are these two species evolving? And in particular, how are they co-evolving? So evolution is something most people will be familiar with, but there's also a concept of co-evolution. And it's very important when we're thinking about plants and insects. And plants and insects are some of the most diverse and important groups on our planet. And we want to, and there's these old theories going back to the 60s that they're actually evolving together. So, they're following each other, either because they're being antagonistic, one's eating the other and it's evolving a trait that stops eating it, and then the insect evolves a trait that allows it to eat it again. It's so antagonistic or mutualistic, where they're evolving to benefit each other. So, yeah, really basic stuff. So I've spent the first year just going out and collecting fruits from this plant, and then we did DNA barcoding on those just to find out, okay, so we've got all these insects coming out, these moths, but how many species are there? We can't tell any difference with our eyes, but maybe genetically there is a difference, and ultimately we found that there are two species. So in a sense, we've kind of discovered two species during this process of genetic work. So yeah, pretty basic stuff really.
Right. In the 3-minute thesis explanation, which you did a great job. So for the folks who don't know, John, you won the UWS. Yeah. WSU, sorry. They spent $20 million and I still can't remember shit, man. Yeah, you were talking about like how these two species, one is like more of a traveler and can get out of the... Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So as in all good science, you kind of go out there and answer one question, and that just leaves you with another set of questions that lead you off in another direction. So once we went out, and we kind of assumed that this plant that we're studying, we looked at it all the way across New South Wales, all the way up the coast, and it was assumed that it would just have one species of pollinator. But then we looked at it and it actually had two species of pollinator. And that made us ask this question. So in nature, you rarely get two species doing the exact same thing. It's called the ecological niche. So two species might feed on the same tree, but one feeds on the leaves and one feeds on the tree trunk. And so they're kind of separated and they're not competing because they feed on different parts. But here we have two insects, two pollinators that seem to be doing the exact same thing. So how can we rectify that with what we know about ecology? How are these two species different? And are they competing? So the next part of my PhD, and it's ongoing now, is kind of trying to answer that question. How do two species that are very similar coexist across such a large area? Every single site that we looked at for these insects had both species in pretty much the same proportion. And kind of the answer we're looking at now is that species can coexist if they're very similar, but they have to have kind of differences in traits. And what we call these is differences in life history traits. So two species' life history might differ because one might invest quite heavily in putting all of its energy in a couple of offspring. So something like an elephant, I guess, might be a good example. Elephant's very long gestation period, something like almost 2 years, put all of its energy into making one very large, well-developed offspring. You look at something like a mouse, they might have a different, what do you call a baby mouse?
I have no idea.
I don't know, we'll look this up. Anyway, might have, a group of baby mice. It might give birth to a group of baby mice 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah.
So you're looking at these different life history traits, like how much you invest in your offspring.
Yeah.
And that's the same for plants, so how much you invest in your seeds, or for insects, potentially how much you invest in your eggs. So that's one trait we're looking at, like how much are they investing? Right. And that might mean that one can outcompete the other. It's a good competitor if it puts all of its energy into laying a couple of really big eggs, or you might get one that just lays tiny eggs and just puts them everywhere and disperses really far and outcompetes because it's very good at laying thousands of tiny eggs, most of which won't survive, but some will.
Yeah.
So it's kind of teasing apart these little species differences, which I'm interested in at the minute, and finding out what's going on there.
Cool. Damn it. We've run out of time, folks. I would have liked to get another 15 minutes with him, but he's got a meeting and I have to head off. I want to thank you for your time, John. That was actually a fascinating conversation. Yeah, so do you have anything else you want to say? If you want people to follow you, or if you're promoting anything?
I would say that follow your passions. General advice to all people. I would also say that if anyone's particularly interested in science and a career in sciences at a young stage in their career, E.O. Wilson, who I mentioned before, is this great scientist, ecologist, and ant expert. He wrote a more general book, and it's called Letters to a Young Scientist. It's a very short book. It's very interesting, and it gives you a kind of background of what you should be doing and the skills you should be developing to succeed anywhere in a career in science. But if you're a biomedical student or an ecologist or an evolutionary biologist, whatever you want, it's a very good book. So I'd recommend that to anyone interested in a career in science. And it's a really good starting point for thinking about how you're going to shape your career in science as well.
Awesome. I'll definitely give that a read then.
Very good.
Thank you again. We'll see you folks next time.